Pay it, or there's no wedding, my fiancée said after her mother handed me a $10,000 invoice for raising her, including diapers, braces, and a dance costume from age 8. They demanded cash in front of both our families. I didn't argue. 2 weeks later, my lawyer's sister entered our venue meeting and opened one notarized loan agreement with interest. I am Daniel. I am 31. I work as a CPA at a mid-sized audit firm, which means I spend my days finding the one number in a spreadsheet that does not belong there. Vanessa and I had been together 3 years, engaged for 14 months, and most of that time had been good. The wedding planning was the part that was not good. Vanessa's mother, Linda, had a habit of treating every favor like a transaction she expected to collect on later, even when nobody had agreed to the terms. A few months before the dinner that ended everything, Linda asked me to cover the cost of repairing her car, framing it as something a future son-in-law should naturally want to do. She said it standing in her driveway, arms crossed, watching me the entire time like she was waiting to see whether I would pass a test I hadn't been told I was taking. I paid it. I did not love the framing, but I paid it, and I told myself it was a small thing. Then there was the wedding menu. Vanessa and I had spent 2 weekends narrowing it down together, tasting dishes, arguing happily over which appetizer worked better with the venue's outdoor space. Linda called the venue directly, without telling either of us, and changed it to her own preferences 3 days before the tasting. When Vanessa found out, she laughed it off and said that was just how her mother showed she cared. I remember watching Vanessa laugh and thinking the joke wasn't actually funny, but I let it go because that's what you do when you're trying to build a life with someone's family. I noticed these things the way I notice anything. I logged them, filed them, and did not say much out loud. Vanessa described her mother as intense but loving. And for a long time, I believed that description was close enough to true, mostly because Vanessa herself had spent so many years finding ways to explain her mother's behavior that I had simply inherited the same habit without questioning it. Then came the dinner where both families sat down together to finalize the last details before the wedding, and the description stopped holding. The dinner was at Linda's house, the dining table extended with a leaf to fit both families, place settings arranged with more formality than the occasion called for. We had just finished the appetizers when Linda reached under her chair and pulled out a folder. Inside it was a single sheet of paper, printed, with a header that read "Cost of Raising Vanessa." She set it down in front of me like she was presenting a contract someone had already reviewed and approved. The page listed line items going back to childhood: diapers, school tuition, orthodontia, summer camp, a dance recital costume from when Vanessa was 8 years old. At the bottom, underlined twice, was a total $10,000. "Is this a joke?" I said. My voice came out flat, not loud. "It's not a joke," Linda said, smiling like she had just given me good news. "Think of it as a wedding gift to the family. You're marrying into everything I built her into. It only seems fair you contribute something back." I looked at Vanessa, waiting for her to laugh, to tell her mother this had gone too far. She didn't laugh. She looked down at the table for a long moment, her fork resting against the edge of her plate, and when she looked back up, her voice was quiet enough that the whole room actually went still around it. "Pay it, or no wedding," Vanessa said. The table went silent in a way that felt physical, like the air pressure in the room had changed. My father, sitting across from me, set down his water glass without taking a sip from it. Linda's smile widened slightly, as though Vanessa had just confirmed something Linda had been waiting all evening to hear someone say out loud. I did not raise my voice. I did not push my chair back. Something in me simply went quiet, the way it does when a number on a page refuses to reconcile no matter how many times I check it. "You're serious," I said. It was not a question by the time it left my mouth, but I asked it like one anyway. "I just didn't want tonight to turn into a fight in front of everyone," Vanessa said, and her hand found mine under the table like that excuse was supposed to be enough to close the subject. It was the last sentence in this entire story where I could have made myself believe she meant well. My sister Rachel was sitting 2 seats down from me at that table. She was there because she was family, invited the same as anyone else to help finalize the wedding details, not because anyone thought a lawyer needed to be in the room. She'd spent most of dinner talking with my mother about flower arrangements, her phone propped against her water glass with a half-finished seating chart open on the screen. Rachel works family and contract law, and I had watched her go quiet in exactly the way she goes quiet right before she asks a question that changes the temperature of a room. "Linda," Rachel said, picking up the printed sheet and turning it over like she was checking for a second page, Is this documented anywhere besides this piece of paper? Linda blinked at her, like the question had not occurred to her as something a person could ask. It's just a family understanding, she said, her smile tightening slightly at the edges. Rachel set the page back down without comment, but she looked at me across the table, and I understood the look. She was not offering to help me get out of paying. She was telling me there was a right way and a wrong way to pay, and only one of them would actually hold up to anything. I called Rachel on the drive home, before Vanessa had even finished texting her mother goodnight from the passenger seat beside me. I asked her to draft something formal, a real loan agreement, notarized, with an interest rate that would hold up if anyone ever looked at it twice. Rachel didn't ask me why. She just asked when I needed it by, the same way she'd ask about any other client. Vanessa noticed how calm I was on the drive and asked what I was thinking. I told her the truth, just not all of it. I'm going to pay it, I said. The right way. She smiled at that, relieved, and reached over to turn up the radio, her shoulders dropping like the whole evening had finally let go of her. I drove the rest of the way with both hands on the wheel and my mind already somewhere else entirely, running numbers that had nothing to do with the road in front of me. She had no idea what the right way meant yet. She was about to find out in a room with both families watching. 2 weeks later, we sat down with the venue coordinator to finalize the contract, a small conference room attached to the reception hall, a long oak table with a seating chart still spread across one end from the last meeting. The walls were lined with framed photographs of past weddings, all soft lighting and matching color palettes, the kind of room built to make you feel like everything was already decided in your favor. Linda took the head of the table without being asked, the same way she had taken the head of her own dining table 2 weeks earlier. She had a coffee in front of her and her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, fully at ease, already treating this meeting like one more item she had already won. She glanced at her watch once, the small, satisfied check of someone confirming they were exactly on schedule for a victory. Rachel walked in 11 minutes late, carrying a leather folio under one arm, dressed exactly the way she dresses for depositions, not flashy, just precise. The venue coordinator, Marissa, looked up first and something in her posture changed before Rachel had even said a word. The particular stillness of someone recognizing a lawyer in a room that was not expecting one. "Can I help you?" Marissa asked. Half standing, her pen still hovering over the seating chart. "I'm here for the Hartley contract review," Rachel said, and kept walking toward our end of the table without waiting for permission, the folio held flat against her chest like she had done this 100 times before, because she had. A man from the catering side, seated near the door reviewing menu cards, leaned slightly out of her path without being asked, the kind of small, automatic deference people give someone who clearly belongs somewhere serious. Linda's face moved through 3 distinct stages, and I watched all 3 happen in real time. First, there was simple confusion, the assumption that this was some kind of venue paperwork. Then, as Rachel opened the folio and the words loan agreement were visible upside down across the table, her face shifted into the exact moment of recognition, her mouth opening slightly before any sound came out, her coffee cup forgotten halfway to her lips. After that came the third stage, the one that lasted the longest. Her face went still in a way that looked almost like calm, except her hands had gone flat on the table, pressing down like she needed something solid under them. "What is this?" Linda said. "This is the loan agreement for the $10,000, I said. "I told you I'd pay it. I'm paying it. As a documented loan, with interest, the same as any real debt would require." "That is not what I meant," Linda said, her voice rising slightly, loud enough that Marissa's pen stopped moving completely against the seating chart. "It was never supposed to be a loan." "Then what was it supposed to be?" I asked. I kept my voice level, the way I keep my voice level when a client tries to explain away a discrepancy I've already found and already have documentation for. "You don't get to turn my family into a courtroom," Linda said, her hand tightening around the coffee cup. "You turned it into an invoice first," I said. "I'm just using the right paperwork for it." Linda looked at Rachel, as if expecting some kind of family loyalty to override the document sitting open between them. Rachel only closed the folio partway and waited, her expression giving nothing back. Then I told them the rest. I told them that for the last 8 months, I had quietly been covering the deposit on this venue, the dress, and a third of the catering total, money Vanessa did not know I had been putting toward our wedding because I had not wanted her worrying about it while she was already stretched thin at work. I told them that if this family ran on invoices now, I had every right to reconsider mine. Vanessa's face went white. "You paid for my dress?" she said, like that single detail had landed harder than anything else said in the entire room. Marissa had gone very still in her chair, her eyes flicking between Linda and me like she was watching something she had not been prepared to witness and would now have to write down somewhere later. Vanessa hadn't moved this whole time. She sat with both hands flat against her thighs under the table, her eyes moving between her mother and me like she was trying to figure out which version of this meeting she was supposed to be in. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said quietly, not to her mother, to me, and for a second I almost answered her honestly before I remembered that question wasn't really mine to fix in that room. Linda did not answer either of us. She stood up slowly, her chair scraping back hard enough that Marissa flinched, and without another word, she walked out of the conference room and left the door open behind her, the sound of her heels fading down the hallway the only thing left in the silence she'd built. For a moment, nobody at the table moved. Marissa set her pen down completely and folded her hands in front of her, the universal posture of someone deciding it was not her place to say anything yet. The catering representative near the door had stopped pretending to review his menu cards and was simply looking down at them, his shoulders pulled in slightly, the way people make themselves smaller when they've witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. Vanessa reached for the loan agreement still sitting open on the table, read the top line once, and set it back down without finishing the rest of the page. Marissa texted me 2 days later. Her message was short and professional. The venue had paused our booking because the remaining deposit balance was now unresolved, and she needed updated payment confirmation before she could hold the date through the end of the month. I read it twice and felt nothing close to victory. Just something quiet and certain settling into place, the way a number finally lands where it's supposed to once you stop forcing it to look different than it is. I called Rachel to ask what came next, already thinking 2 steps ahead about the contract language and what it would take to formally close out the loan agreement regardless of what happened with the wedding itself. She told me to give it a week before responding to Marissa, just to see what Linda and Vanessa did next without anyone pushing them in either direction. Vanessa called Marissa directly the next morning, trying to convince her to hold the date without the full deposit, framing it as a misunderstanding between families that didn't need to involve the venue at all. She called twice more that afternoon when the first attempt didn't work, her tone shifting from friendly to insistent each time. Marissa, who had been neutral up to that point, started documenting every conversation in writing after that call. Telling me later, she felt like she was being pressured into making a decision that was never hers to make in the first place. Linda called me twice that same week. The first call was an apology that lasted 4 minutes and never once mentioned the actual amount of money or the actual words she had used at that table. She talked instead about family, about how things had gotten out of hand, about how none of us were perfect, circling the apology without ever landing it anywhere specific. Toward the end of the call, she mentioned, almost in passing, that she hoped I understood she had only ever wanted what was best for everyone, a phrase that managed to take up 30 seconds without committing to a single concrete thing. The second call was not an apology at all. She asked whether I could let this go for Vanessa's sake, as though the entire situation was something happening to me rather than something I had simply responded to. Vanessa told me I was punishing her mother and, by extension, punishing her. She said I was treating a family disagreement like a business deal, her voice climbing toward the same register it had taken on at the dinner table. I asked her what she would call handing someone an invoice for being loved, and she didn't have an answer for that. She hung up instead, and I sat with the phone still in my hand for a while afterward, not calling back. A few days later, Vanessa tried a different approach. She reached out to my parents directly, asking them to talk some sense into me, framing the loan agreement as something cold and unnecessary that was going to ruin the wedding for everyone involved. My mother called me that evening, not to pressure me, but to ask, gently, whether Vanessa understood what she had actually said at that dinner table. I told her I didn't think she did, not yet, and my mother went quiet on the other end of the line in a way that told me she agreed. Rachel called me on a Thursday night, her voice carrying the particular flatness she uses when she's about to tell me something she finds professionally interesting and personally satisfying at the same time. Linda had shown up at her office that afternoon, not about our loan agreement, but to ask if Rachel could help her with an entirely different situation. It turned out Linda owed money to her own cousin, a debt going back several years, tied to a nearly identical arrangement. Money fronted at one point, then framed later as something owed back with interest, except this time Linda was the one being asked to pay. Rachel said Linda had sat across from her, describing the situation with genuine confusion, as though she could not understand why her cousin was being so unreasonable about something that had happened so long ago. At one point, according to Rachel, Linda had actually used the phrase "family doesn't keep score like that," apparently without any sense of how close it landed to the conversation we'd all had 2 weeks earlier. Rachel hadn't said anything to Linda about the irony of it. She didn't need to. She just told me the facts, plainly, the way she tells me anything that doesn't require commentary to land on its own. I sat with my phone in my hand for a while after we hung up, not saying anything either, just turning the coincidence over slowly enough to feel the shape of it. I didn't call Linda. I didn't call Vanessa either. I just sat there in the quiet of my own living room, letting the news settle the way it wanted to settle, without trying to do anything with it. I cooked dinner alone on a Tuesday, the same recipe I used to make for two of us, and didn't text Vanessa to ask if she wanted to come over the way I always used to before starting the pan. I ate at my counter instead of the table, plate balanced in one hand, phone face down next to the stove the entire time I cooked and the entire time I ate. It was only halfway through the meal that I noticed I hadn't checked it once. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been in months. Not empty exactly, just settled, like a room that had finally stopped waiting for someone. I left the second burner unlit, the one I used to use for a side dish that only ever made sense for 2 plates. I couldn't remember what the dish used to taste like when there were 2 plates instead of one, and for the first time, that didn't feel like something I needed to figure out. Linda was the one who turned love into a ledger, and by the end of that spring, she was the one watching the people she had ledgered walk away from her one at a time. I heard about it from Rachel, who'd kept loose contact with Linda's cousin through the unresolved family debt that had surfaced earlier that year. She called me on a Sunday afternoon, her voice carrying none of the satisfaction I might have expected from her, just a kind of tired neutrality, like she was reporting weather rather than news. There had been a family gathering, a cousin's anniversary party at a restaurant outside the city, the kind of event Linda had always treated as her territory, arriving early, greeting people loudly, making sure everyone clocked her presence in the room. She had come dressed for it, seated at a long table with extended family on both sides, her usual spot near the center where she liked to direct conversation. According to the cousin, no one had moved to sit in the chair next to her for the entire dinner. It stayed empty through the appetizers, through the toasts, through dessert, while conversation moved around her, instead of through her. The way water moves around a rock, it has stopped noticing. It's not that anyone said anything, the cousin told Rachel, her voice apparently more tired than angry when she said it. It's just that every time we get close, it turns into who owes who. Rachel repeated the line to me exactly as she'd heard it, without adding anything of her own, letting it sit there the way Linda's printed invoice had once sat on the dinner table between us. Rachel said the cousin had also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Linda had tried twice during dinner to start a toast, raising her glass before anyone else had finished their food, and both times the table had simply continued talking past her, the conversation closing back over the gap like water filling a footprint. I sat with that for a long moment after we hung up. I thought about the printed page Linda had set in front of me at that dinner table months earlier. The careful list of line items, the underlined total at the bottom, the smile she'd worn while she handed it over like it was a gift. I thought about how certain she had looked doing it, like she was the one owed something, like generosity could be itemized and billed retroactively to whoever loved her daughter. I didn't feel triumphant hearing about the empty chair beside her at that restaurant. I felt something closer to setting down a bag I had been carrying for so long I'd stopped noticing the weight of it. I live alone now, in the same apartment, with the calendar still hanging on the kitchen wall by the refrigerator. I crossed out the wedding date and pinned the week after the venue formally canceled the booking, and I never wrote a new date in its place, leaving that square on the calendar simply blank for whatever month comes next. I got back the portion of the deposit Rachel's contract protected, the same agreement that started in that conference room, over an invoice I never should have been handed in the first place. I used part of it to replace the kitchen table, a small, ordinary decision that somehow felt like the first one in months that belonged entirely to me. I eat most meals at the counter now anyway, but it's good to know the table is there. I'm not wiser than I was a year ago. I'm just no longer being billed for anything.